Hello, comparative religions, and welcome to the second lesson this week on Islam. Now, in the first lesson, we talked about the history of Islam. Then we talked about that power vacuum that exists after Muhammad dies that leads to the four rightly guided caliphs. And then we ended by talking about how the arguments over those four caliphs led to the division with the Sunni and the Shiites. We're going to pick up there today and talk about some of the key dynasties in the history of Islam, some of the key empires in the history of Islam, Islam in modern times, and then some general traditions, some general beliefs within Islam itself. Now, again, as you work through these, there's not going to be a quiz on this, okay, this week, or not going to be an assessment on this week, but the material is going to be on the final exam. So what I would do is bring that worksheet up that I uploaded on Canvas, the Islamic Review, okay, and use that as your notes, okay? As we go through this presentation, as you watch and you listen to this presentation, use the slides to answer the questions on that review, and those will be your notes for this presentation, okay? Now, where we left off, okay, the talking about the four rightly guided caliphs, okay, we're going to pick up with the Umayyad dynasty, okay. The Umayyad dynasty lasted from 661 to 750 CE or AD. All right. It is based in Damascus in Syria. And the Umayyads are going to have a massive expansion of Islam into China, across North Africa, and into Spain. Now, the Umayyads are seen to have lost their way, okay, because they tended to live in splendor, all right? Because they live in splendor, they are accused of forgetting their faith. One of the things, and we're going to talk about that in just a few minutes, one of the things that is required is the giving of alms, okay? So the fact that these people were living in splendor, okay, and spending a lot of their own personal wealth to make themselves comfortable probably would indicate that they're not giving alms to the poor like they should, which is why people would say that they are forgetting their faith. Now, the Umayyad dynasty is followed by the Abbasid dynasty. The Abbasid dynasty is going to last from 750 until 1258 CE or AD. They are going to overthrow the Umayyads. Their capital will be in Baghdad. It is during the Abbasid dynasty that Islamic culture will reach its high point. We also see growing divisions both geographically and socially. For example, Muslims who are Arab, they tend to be the scholars. Muslims living in Persia tend to be the administrators. And Muslims living in Turkey tend to be the military leaders. Okay, so we see Islam expand into these areas, but then each one of these areas becomes known for a specific occupation. The Arabs are the scholars, the Persians are the administrators, and the Turks are the military leaders. Now, the Abbasid dynasty will be replaced by the Mongol Empire. The Mongols were an Asiatic people that conquered the Abbasid dynasty beginning in 1258. Now, even though they're from Asia, the Mongols will convert to Islam. So even though they take over the Abbasid dynasty, in a way, the Abbasids will impact the Mongols because they get the Mongols to convert to Islam. The Mongol Empire is followed by the Ottoman Turks. The Ottoman Turks conquered the Eastern Roman Empire, okay, the Byzantine Empire. They also take over the key Christian city of Constantinople. They will rename it Istanbul, and Istanbul will become their capital. Constantinople is the capital of the Byzantine Empire. Istanbul will become the capital of the Ottoman Empire. One of the big leaders for the Ottomans is Suleiman the Magnificent. Suleiman is going to spearhead a new advance on Europe. Okay, so they're going to move out of Constantinople, okay, out of Turkey, and start moving into Europe. What's interesting is the Ottomans are supported by Protestant Christians, because the Protestant Christians and the Ottoman Turks, the Muslims, find common ground in their campaigns against the Pope and the Catholic Church. So even though we're dealing with, you have this Protestant group, which is of course Christian, and the Ottoman Turks are of course Muslim, the thing that unites them is their hatred of the Pope and the Catholic Church. So the Protestants are actually going to support the Ottoman Turks for a while, because they've found a common ally against the Catholic Church. Now we're going to move away from this part of the world, and we're going to talk about the Mughal Empire. The Mughal Empire was established in India, to be more specific, in northern India. It combines Islam with Indian traditions, as well as Mongolian and Arabic elements. One of the best examples of Mughal architecture, in fact, it is a monumental piece of Mughal architecture, is the Taj Mahal. The Taj Mahal was built by Shah Jahan as a tomb for his wife. And it is a classic example of Islamic architecture. And there's the picture of it down on the bottom of that slide. Okay. First off, it's very symmetrical. You will notice here, if you were to divide this building in half, it would be the same on both sides. Okay. You got the two towers right there. You have the four minarets surrounding it. Okay. Even the trees on either side are even. Okay, so it's very, very symmetrical, and it will serve not only as a religious house of worship, because the minarets are there, but also as a tomb for Shah Jahan and his wife. The Mughals are going to experience problems with Hinduism. Okay, the native Hindus tend to put up a fight, so the Mughals are going. That's why I said the Mughals are going to be found mostly in northern India. They're not going to make too much of an advance down into central India or southern India. Okay, they're going to be heavily opposed by the Hindus. Now, between 600 and 1800 CE, military victories continue to spread Islam around the world. Okay, and as Islam spreads, it indoctrinates a bunch of people around the world. Okay, so a bunch of people are converting to Islam between 600 and 1800 CE, or 600 and 1800 AD. The Ottoman Empire, back to the Ottomans, the Ottoman Empire turns out to be the dominant Muslim empire. In fact, it will be the dominant Muslim nation up through the 20th century. The Ottoman Empire is part of the Central Powers that fight during World War I. After World War I, the Ottomans will embrace more secular government. Plus, the empire gets carved up in the peace process after World War I, and between getting divided after the war and this embracing of secular movements and secular government after the war, the role of the caliphate government, okay, being guided by a caliph, okay, will effectively come to an end. Islam is still going to be important, but the structure of the government is going to change. All right. For example, one of the things they'll probably be exposed to is democracy and giving the people a choice. So the people will probably have a greater say in who the leaders are, okay, as we move into the 20s and throughout the 20th century. Now we're going to transition, using the Ottoman Empire to transition into more modern times. One of the hot button issues with Islam is the role of women. Now, according to the Islamic holy book, the Quran, women are supposed to be equal. The question becomes, when it comes to actually practicing this, is that the case? For example, women wear heavy clothing, okay, heavy clothing that covers their face, covers their body, and things like that. The burqas, that is an example of ritual isolation, okay, the dress, okay. Then you have the purdah, which is actually physical isolation, All right. Again, it's still part of ritual isolation, but we're talking about physically separating women from men. All right. Plus, Muslim men are allowed to marry up to 4 wives, but a wife cannot have more than 4 husbands. A Muslim man, I think this is correct, a Muslim man may also marry someone who is not a Muslim, but Muslim women are not allowed to marry a man who is not a Muslim. All right. So again, it's a big question. This is up for debate. Even though the scriptures for Muslims say women are to be treated equal, is that exactly the practice that we see in a lot of Muslim communities? Okay. And there are going to be some people that say, no, that is definitely not something that we see. One of the big issues, and if we had more time, we were going to talk about this. One of the big issues with Islam today is, can Islam maintain its traditional standards in a non-traditional world? The Ottoman Empire is a good example. After World War I, the Ottoman Empire comes under the influence of more secular societies and more secular governments, and the traditions that they've held on to begin to disappear. Okay. Plus, we would talk about the militaristic nature of the Ottoman Empire. Does the militaristic nature of the Ottoman, or not just the Ottoman Empire, I'm sorry, the militaristic nature of Islam, does that allow it to exist in a more modern world? Okay, all kinds of things like that. All right. So as you know, as we've gone through these slides, just keep that in the back of your mind. One of the things that we see with Muslims is they are fighting to hold on to their traditions in an increasingly non-traditional world. Okay. Is it possible for Islam to coexist in a non-traditional world, or with a non-traditional world? Okay. And again, that's up for debate. All right. And scholars will argue for and against that position, and will both sides will have pretty convincing evidence, or for their point. Now, one of the key things associated with Islam is jihad. Okay, now be sure you get this down. Okay, a jihad literally means doing one's utmost to realize a goal. Okay, according to Islamic scholarship, jihad means doing one's utmost to realize a goal. Over time, okay, and this is what we talk about in history class, all right, over time, jihad has gotten associated with holy war. Okay. In fact, that is the number one definition: a holy war waged on behalf of Islam as a religious duty. Notice also, though, it's the personal struggle and devotion to Islam involving spiritual discipline. Okay. And the second definition is a crusade for a principle or belief. Jihad is divided into 2 categories: the greater jihad and the lesser jihad. The greater jihad is the second definition, a crusade for a principle or belief, and the personal struggle in devotion to Islam. Okay, so the greater jihad is the internal struggle with following Islam the way it should be followed. The lesser jihad, okay, deals with the holy war. Okay, fighting against oneself is the greater jihad. Fighting against others, the outer enemy, that's the lesser jihad. Okay? So when people talk about jihad, yes, it's a holy war. But the greater jihad, it's the holy war, it's the internal struggle to follow the religion properly. The lesser jihad is the holy war against an outside force. Okay? And a lot of times it's the lesser jihad that is covered in the news, because it's the dealing with the conflict with somebody outside you. Now, in the modern era, there are a bunch of different groups within Islam. Okay. The first is the Kharjai. All right. The Kharjai are active dissenters. All right. Not only do they sometimes break from Islamic tradition, but they also want to be separate from the secular world and separate from Western influence. Okay? They dislike the political systems of both Uthman and Ali. Now, technically, they no longer exist, but their aggressive behavior has influenced later groups. Okay? And some of these later groups will use the name the Kharji. All right? They believe any person who committed a grave sin is no longer a Muslim. So if you commit a grave sin, you're gone. You're not part of the faith anymore. They also put jihad on an equal footing with the five pillars, and we'll talk more about the five pillars here in just a second. And remember, Uthman and Ali were both son-in-laws of Muhammad. Well, the Kharji say leadership in Islam should be open to anybody who has a righteous character, not just those that have personal connections with Muhammad, not just those from the lines of his sons-in-law. Okay, if you are a devout person, you have righteous character, you have the ability to be a leader within Islam. Now, that division we talked about on the first lesson, the Sunni and the Shiite, they still exist today. The Sunni are the traditionals, all right, we talked about them. They're the followers of Uthman. The majority of Muslims today are Sunni. They believe religious authority is a consensus rather than a caliph. Okay, so all of Muslims together, all right? So they would kind of be inspired by maybe some more secular movements, some more democratic movements, in that it's about consensus. People are going to vote on it. They also believe the Quran should be interpreted by Sunnah, all right, which is tradition. And where does that tradition come from? It comes from Muhammad. All right, so follow Muhammad's example in interpreting the Quran. All right, don't use any outside commentaries. Just go with what Muhammad said. On the other side, you've got the Shiite. Okay, the Shiite are partisans. They are the followers of Ali. They are the minority group. Only about 15% of Muslims claim to be Shiite. They believe, instead of consensus, that religious authority should be vested in an imam, okay, a religious leader. And they believe in the 12 imams, the 12 caliphs, okay, so the four we mentioned in the first lesson, plus 8 others, and a 13th to come. Okay, so there will be another caliph to come that will be a leader in the Islamic religion. Then the last group is Sufism. Sufism is a mystical movement in Islam. Now, some of the more traditional followers of Islam see this group as a bunch of heretics because they believe truth is not rational, but is a result of direct personal experience. Okay, so in other words, you develop your own truth, okay, based on your experience. They have Sufi sheikhs, okay, masters, all right. They are to be venerated. It's kind of similar to saints. So these are kind of leaders in the faith, key historical figures in the faith. And they also prefer a life of celibacy. All right. So in some respects, they're kind of like Islamic monks. All right. And that they're going to live a life of celibacy. Now, let's get into some of the more common beliefs of Islam. All right. Number one, the Holy Book. The Holy Book is the Quran. Quran means recitations. The Quran is written in Arabic. It is considered the most perfect example of Arabic literature. And the Quran contains all the revelations of God given to Muhammad. It is organized in chapters or surah, and supposedly that organization mirrors the original text that is present in heaven. Okay, which would make sense because if Allah is going to send Gabriel to Muhammad to give him these revelations, it would make sense that Muhammad records them to mirror what is going to be in heaven. Okay, so the organization of the Quran is going to mirror what will be found eventually in heaven. Now, the Quran acknowledges earlier prophets. It mentions Adam, it mentions Abraham, it mentions Moses, it mentions Jesus. Okay, Jesus is a prophet, a good prophet, according to the Quran. It also deals with theological views, moral exhortations, and ceremonial and civil law. In fact, some of the same things that you're going to find in the Jewish Bible and some of the things you're going to find in the Christian Bible. Both the other monotheistic holy books mention theological views, moral exhortations, ceremonial and civil law. So it would make sense we're going to find that in the Quran as well. As I said, it's supposed to mirror the text in heaven, so it is seen as the incarnation of God on earth. Now, a Quran can be translated, but when you read from the Quran, when you recite from the Quran, you have to use Arabic, okay? It can be recited in Arabic only. It can be translated so that others can read it, but it must be recited in Arabic only. In fact, I had a student that was Muslim brought in his copy of the Quran. It has Arabic on one side and the English translation on the other, okay? But it should be recited in Arabic only. Now, along with the Quran comes the Hadith, okay? The Hadith means tradition. For some Muslims, it is the most important text next to the Quran because it is the actions and sayings of the prophets, not just Muhammad, but the other prophets that come after him, okay? Muhammad is the main prophet, then there are some other leaders that come after him. It establishes the norms by which Muslim community is governed. Okay, it establishes the norms. So these would be kind of your societal rules that the community is going to be based on. Right? Now, think back, okay, to the Sunni. All right, the Sunni probably would not have a lot to do with the Hadith because remember they say the Quran should be interpreted by tradition, Muhammad's example. Okay, this is a supplemental text. So for the Sunni, it might not be appreciated. Okay, it's definitely not going to be seen on the same level as the Quran. Okay, and they probably also would not appreciate the Sharia. Okay, Sharia means the way of path. Oftentimes, you'll hear it referred to as Sharia law. Sharia law guides every human action and encompasses every facet of life. It is highly organized religious law. This is where you would get a sense of right and wrong. And not only does it govern your behavior, but it also talks about behavior in politics. It gives organization to economics, to society, and to religion. Okay, in terms of ceremony. Okay, religious ceremonies, religious feasts, that sort of thing. Those that follow the Sharia are organized into communities called ummas, and those that guide the affairs of the community are ulamas. Okay, so it organizes again. It organizes society. It organizes society into ummas, and the men who guide it are ulamas. Now, in terms of belief, all right, we've already mentioned this. All right, Muslims believe in God, one indivisible God. They're monotheistic. For Muslims, that God is Allah. They believe in a last day. There will be a judgment of the dead and the undead. They believe in angels. Okay. There are two big angels, Gabriel, who came to Muhammad and imparted revelation to him, and Satan. Okay. Or Shaitan, the great Satan. Okay. Besides the Quran, okay, they consider themselves the people of the book, okay? They mention the Torah, they mention the Bible. Now, it's definitely not on the same level as the Quran, okay? But they mention these other holy books, all right? Because those other holy books make reference to the prophets, okay? They believe in prophets. Now, Muhammad is the main prophet, but there are going to be others that come after him, okay? Um, and they're going to acknowledge their importance in the religion as well. Now, the 5 big beliefs of Muslims are summarized in the 5 pillars. The first one is the Shahada, okay, the Shahada, which is basically a profession of faith. It is the first action of the convert, okay? It can be said numerous times by the devout. And it is basically this statement: there is no other God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet, okay? That is the statement of faith. Before you convert, you must acknowledge that. And once you become a convert, you can say it as many times as you want. All right. And in fact, sometimes it either signifies or ends prayer time. Okay. Speaking of prayer, Muslims pray 5 times a day. And before they pray, they partake in ritual washing. When they pray, they must face toward Mecca. Okay. Muslims do gather one day a week. I mean, you pray 5 times a day daily, but then you gather at a mosque at least once a week, usually on Friday. Okay, that's when you come to the mosque and you gather. But daily, you're supposed to pray. Wherever you are, you're supposed to drop and pray and face toward Mecca. Okay, there have been several NBA stars who have been Muslim, and when it comes time in the day to pray, they will. I remember seeing this. They exit the game. Okay, they go pray, and then they come back. All right, but you must pray 5 times a day, facing Mecca. Then on Friday, you would gather together in the mosque and pray at the mosque as well. Alms, we talked about this, okay, zakat. Normally 10%. All right. And other religions hold to 10%, like Christianity. When you tithe to the church, you're supposed to give 10%. Even Judaism mentions giving 10%. Giving to the poor is an outward sign of true piety, okay, true humbleness. All right. You're taking care of others, which is why when some of those empires are living in luxury, people criticize them for leaving the faith and not following the true faith, because otherwise you'd be giving more to the poor. Okay, you wouldn't have as much to be able to build these luxurious palaces or live in splendor and wealth and things like that. You should be giving more of it to the poor. All right, 10% is the minimum, but you can always give more. Fasting. Okay, fasting usually occurs during Ramadan. Okay, and the ninth month of the year is Ramadan. During Ramadan, you fast from sunrise to sunset. But then at sunset, you can party with your friends and you can eat. But by the time the sun rises, you need to have finished eating, okay, so that you can fast again. Some people are excused from fasting: the sick, travelers, soldiers, and women, okay, especially women who might be pregnant are excused. All right. Again, I've had students that are Muslim. Depending on when Ramadan falls, sometimes it falls. Some of these students happen to play football, and they have to be very, very careful when Ramadan falls because they're supposed to fast during the day, which is oftentimes when they have to go to practice. And some of the kids have been in some pretty serious trouble because they've been they're passing out and things like that because they're fasting, but they're having these very rigorous practices. So you got to be careful the activity that you do during Ramadan, right? And then once Ramadan's over, you have a big celebration to break the fast. Okay, so not only can you eat once sunset takes place, but then for 3 days after Ramadan, you have a big festival and a big party as well. And then the fifth pillar is the Hajj, which is a pilgrimage. It is the duty of all Muslims to visit Mecca at least once in their adult life. You go to the Kaaba, you go to the Zamzam well. There's a great documentary by National Geographic that talks about this pilgrimage to Mecca. Okay. Then once you get to Mecca, then you make a pilgrimage to Medina, like we talked about in lesson 1, retracing the route that Muhammad took. Okay. Remember, he left Mecca to settle a dispute in Medina. Medina accepts his teachings, and Medina becomes the city of the prophet. Well, you retrace his steps during this pilgrimage as well. Pilgrims give up all their earthly possessions for a while. Okay, what I mean is when they come to these to Mecca, you don't bring a lot of personal um, clothing and things like that. You're going to dress in white because the idea is everybody is supposed to be seen as equal. Um, you start by circling the Kaaba 7 times. Then you walk through the valleys in search of the Zamzam well. You also walk 15 miles out to Mount Arafat to meditate from noon to sunset. Okay, and the National Geographic video showed this pilgrimage out to Arafat. All right, and then also the pilgrimage to Medina as well. And there are these pillars. There's also Muhammad was tested, and he threw stones at the demon that was testing him. There are pillars that you throw stones at, um, recreating that episode from Muhammad's life as well. Okay. Now, it is your duty to visit Mecca at least once in your life. There are ways to take a pilgrimage without actually taking a pilgrimage. For example, at one time, and I think this is still the case, at one time, if you couldn't go, but you could help support somebody to go, it was like you went on the pilgrimage yourself. Sometimes, if you can get them to carry a personal effect of yours, it's like you went on the pilgrimage as well. Now, we're not talking about something extravagant, okay? Because we've already talked about a lot of personal belongings are left back at home. But if you can give them something small to take, it's like you went on the pilgrimage as well. So there are ways to complete this fifth pillar if you are not physically able to go to Mecca. Okay. Now, there are certain rites of passage associated with Islam. At birth, a child is named after 7 days and a sacrifice is made. Marriage, we kind of already talked about this. Muslim men may marry non-Muslim women, but a Muslim woman must marry a Muslim man. Right? And part of the tradition is a bride price must be made, okay, and must be paid. So it's kind of like the arranged marriages. We talked about arranged marriage with other belief systems as well. As part of the deal, the groom has to pay for the bride. Okay, there's a payment of some kind that goes to the bride's family. When a Muslim dies, the body is washed with water, and they are laid on the right side facing Mecca. Okay, and also you have to be buried within a certain amount of time. Okay, and then there are some basic restrictions for life, like there's no eating of pork, there's no alcohol. All right, we want to avoid drunkenness, and there's no usury. Usury is the lending of money and the charging of exorbitant interest. Okay, again, think about alms. Okay, if somebody needs money, um, it is a sign of piety and humbleness to give them that money. Okay, or if you do give them that money and charge and charge interest, it should not be extravagant. Okay, let them pay you back the amount that they borrowed in the time that they can. Okay, no charging of interest. Now, that's it for the main beliefs of Islam. Again, I know with all three of these monotheistic religions, we have flown through the content. I'm sorry if I've seen disjointed and things like that, but we've had a lot of material to cover. Okay, be sure that you look through both of these presentations and you've got those questions on that review sheet answered, so that you have something to study by for your final exam, which is coming up at the end of school.